So I've got a question for 49ers fans as we officially enter draft week, because I know that this is very divisive, what the 49ers will do at number 11. Would you be mad if the 49ers drafted Mykel Williams, the edge rusher out of Georgia, at number 11? Yes or no? You could put it in the comment section. Yes, I'd be incensed if the 49ers use number 11 for Mykel Williams, a guy who's averaged about 5 sacks per year in college. Or no, I'd actually be really happy if the 49ers did it. The reason that I bring it up here to begin draft week is that Peter Schrager recently moved to ESPN, did a lot of his draft intel this weekend, and I really trust Peter's draft intel. He and Daniel Jeremiah do a really good job right before the draft, getting a sense of the room, reading the tea leaves. And whereas the mock draft season is a lot of conjecture, the final days of reporting from these two guys, Peter Schrager and Daniel Jeremiah, are more than conjecture. That definitely are rooted in talking to teams and some fact. And Peter said that after he spent the entire weekend on the phones, here are two names who will go higher than where the consensus mock drafts have them going right now: Mykel Williams and Colston Loveland, who's the tight end out of Michigan. So I guess we can't really ignore Colston Loveland's name either. But I think that the central part of this debate regarding the 49ers and number 11 is, what kind of trench player did they pick in the first round? And of course, they can shock everybody and go tight end or go receiver or do whatever. But I'm trying to narrow it down, and I think that it's productive to focus this discussion on defensive linemen or even offensive linemen. And for today, because Mykel Williams' name has come up, and he's a guy who we've talked about a little bit, I think we need to talk about him a little bit more. The odds for Mykel Williams to go under pick 16 are minus 400. So Vegas seems to expect that Mykel Williams is going to go high up in this draft. Now, the reason that this is polarizing is that people dump Mykel Williams in the same bucket as Shamar Stewart. And I don't think that's fair. Shamar Stewart and Mykel Williams are both extremely athletic, very traits-based players. I get it. But they shouldn't be in the same bucket, because Mykel Williams, unlike Shamar Stewart, actually has decent college productivity under his belt. I mean, we're talking 14 sacks over his college career. Shamar Stewart can't say the same. Last season, despite playing on an injured ankle, and I think he was re-aggravating it over the course of the season, Mykel Williams was at 5 sacks, 8.5 tackles for loss. And remember that Georgia is also really, really deep along the defensive line. So this is a limited snap count kind of situation, especially if the guy is playing on a hurt ankle. But you look at the arm length. His arm length is nearly 35 inches. So, you immediately think of the really, really toolsy edge rushers in this game. Jason Pierre-Paul was Dane Brugler's comp physically for Mykel Williams. So you look at the length, you look at the size, which you can correlate with run defense quality. And I think that Mykel Williams is a really good run stopper on the edge. And you look at the speed. At his pro day, he ran a 4.7 740, which is solid for a guy who weighed in at 267 pounds. I mean, all of those things means that he has the tools to play edge rusher at a high level, 3-down level, playing against the run and the pass at the NFL. I have to add that the Philadelphia Eagles seem to have found a golden strategy going after University of Georgia defensive linemen. Maybe the 49ers tap into the same. Personally, I would look at this as the 49ers seeing all-pro potential in Mykel Williams, just due to the measurables and due to the fact that he actually has shown some productivity on the field in a very, very good system over at Georgia. I am not shocked that the odds on this guy going earlier are rising. And, Peter Schrager, whom we trust, talking about Mykel Williams going earlier than people expect. So instead of something later in the first round, maybe something a bit earlier in the first round that may match with what the 49ers are looking for and where they're picking at number 11. Anyway, it is a big week, 49ers draft week. It's going to get kicked off on Thursday. Typically, Monday ahead of the draft is when John Lynch runs his press conference. And oftentimes the 49ers offseason program starts today on this Monday. However, due to the Easter holiday yesterday, hope everybody enjoyed with your families, the 49ers have pushed things back a day. So tomorrow is the first day of the offseason program for veterans. It is not mandatory attendance, but we will ask the question, will Brock Purdy report to the start of the 49ers offseason program? We're going to be on Brock Purdy watch tomorrow. Obviously, he doesn't have a contract yet or a new contract with the 49ers. He's got his old rookie deal. We do not expect Brock Purdy to play on that rookie deal. We expect an extension to be reached at some point this offseason. We have circled April 21st or April 22nd since the 49ers moved this back a day due to the Easter holiday. We expect this and to be a deadline of sorts, but a soft deadline, not a hard deadline. And we always, in the course of these contract negotiations, set different milestones over the offseason. And the 49ers, in an ideal world, would love all their players to be active participants at all times when it's called for at the team facility. So whether it be the start of the offseason program in April or OTAs in May, obviously training camp in late July, preseason, and then the regular season. Those are all different markers along the way. And then when those are used as context for contract negotiations, you can call them deadlines of sort, right? This is going to be a softer deadline. 49ers aren't going to be doing 11 on 11 stuff, but I think they'd still, in an ideal world, would love their quarterback to be in the building. Will their QB be in the building even without a new contract? I think that's very possible that he is, but I'm not going to make any assumptions at this point. So we're going to be on Brock Purdy watch over the course of this week. Once you move forward to OTAs and then especially to training camp, the soft deadline that we talk about turns into a harder deadline. And deadlines are what make negotiations move. Now, you could sit there and have different numbers and different ideas of what a contract looks like in March and throughout most of April. But there's nothing that's happening at the team facility that would firmly encourage either side to budge off of its existing position. But then once the offseason program starts, there starts to be reason for sides to move off of their existing position, especially the team. The team is the entity that would rather have the player present and participating. Obviously, training camp is going to bring a much stronger push to get everybody there in person, which is why we've seen holdouts or hold-ins extend into training camp from the 49ers players that have been up for big contract extensions. But obviously, this is nowhere near that point yet. Training camp's still about 3 months away. It's April 21st, and training camp will start somewhere in the July 20s. Let's see what the exact date for training camp is. July 22nd is what I have on my calendar for the start of 49ers training camp. So I'm going to fly back to the Bay Area today in just a couple hours, be in my seat for John Lynch's press conference tomorrow. That is the 49ers draft week conference. I'm sure that he'll be asked about Purdy, so we will have answers on that front. This is going to be a huge week on so many different levels. Obviously, we'll be talking to Lynch about Purdy and the draft picks, but I think we're going to have a chance to visit with some of the 49ers veteran players tomorrow. This is going to be the first check-in since the end of the season. So we'll see how the offseason program is beginning. The vibe of the Purdy negotiations, whatever tone we get from talking to Lynch this week, is going to be news for however long that takes. And then obviously everybody's focus is going to be on that draft, which begins on Thursday. But would you be mad if the 49ers drafted Mykel Williams at number 11? That is my yes or no question. You can go ahead and drop your answer into the comment section. Of course, if the 49ers draft Mykel Williams, that would be a bookend for a guy who has essentially announced his presence at the 49ers offseason program. This is Nick Bosa's Instagram story. in beautiful Los Gatos. Maybe that's Nick Bosa's backyard. Very nice backyard there, looking at the Santa Cruz Mountains. Sunny day in Los Gatos, not a single cloud in the sky. But Bosa lives in Florida, Fort Lauderdale. That's where he's from over most of the offseason. But when it comes time for the offseason program, if he's not negotiating a contract, if he wants to be there, then Nick Bosa flies to the Bay Area. And he is now officially in Los Gatos, I believe, ready to report for the 49ers offseason program beginning tomorrow. So if the 49ers did draft Mykel Williams at number 11, they obviously would be using their first-round draft capital on a bookend for Nick Bosa, which I believe this team could use. You can always use an upgrade at almost every position. For the 49ers, the positions where I think it'd be impossible to upgrade this offseason would be Bosa's spot, Fred Warner's spot, Deommodore Lenoir's spot, Christian McCaffrey's spot, Brock Purdy's spot, Trent Williams' spot, Kyle Juszczyk's spot. There's a very, very limited amount of spots on this roster that could be upgraded this offseason, that couldn't be upgraded this offseason, right? That's the list of those spots. And elsewhere, the 49ers can use a bump up, even though I do think that opposite Nick Bosa right now, they're actually not in the worst shape along the front line. Yetur Gross-Matos, when healthy last season, was a very productive player, but I think they can use more edge rushing depth. And, on this roster, I signify holes in red. I think defensive tackle is where they've got big gaping needs to fill. Now, at the depth position of edge rusher, I've got red in this cell right here. So the defensive line is going to need a lot of attention moving forward for this team. And I think that Robert Saleh signed on to be the defensive coordinator again with that understanding. I think the 49ers enter this draft knowing that it is deep on defensive tackles especially, but we can't ignore some of the edge talent in this class, and Mykel Williams is a key name when we discuss the edge rushing talent. Of course, there's also Shamar Stewart, and that, to me, that's a more polarizing name than Mykel Williams, and it should be because Shamar didn't have the college productivity that Mykel Williams had. But it all boils down to the traits versus production argument entering an NFL draft. And I will forever say that it doesn't have to be one or the other. For players like Shamar Stewart, it is more extremely tilted toward the trait side, but you can look for a player who's done both. And a player, and obviously the projection is more important than what a player has actually done. So the reason that teams might be in love with Shamar Stewart, we'll see who is. He visited the 49ers, but the reason they wouldn't be because of the production in college. It would be because of the production that they project moving forward. But I think in an ideal world with your first round pick, you do get a player who has the resume and who also has the physical measurables that make you comfortable that he can fit into that NFL system. 49ers hosted 30 players over the course of the past month or so. We can take a look at that 49ers top 30 list. SF Data 49ers was able to put this into a very nice little chart. We talked about this a lot last week, but entering this draft week, I think that just visualizing it, putting it up on the screen is very productive. Shamar Stewart is on there. So is Mykel Williams. SF Data Niners included the big board ranking of all of these players. Mykel Williams at 15 on the big board and Shamar Stewart at 16. So the reason these two players are going to be compared a lot, they're both at the same position. They're both very toolsy, traits-based players. Both, obviously, there still is some meat on the bone productivity-wise, but I think that that's the case more for Shamar Stewart than Mykel Williams. The 49ers' top prospect, according to the big board that visited as one of their official visits, was Kelvin Banks Jr., tackle out of Texas, whom some people think is going to be a guard at the next level. Josh Simmons out of Ohio State is a name to watch because I think he'd be higher up on this big board had he not suffered the patella injury this past season. So that was a season ender for Josh Simmons. He still has a first-round grade. He still did visit the 49ers, and we know that San Francisco is interested in adding an offensive tackle. Then there's Walter Nolan, who a lot of people think is undervalued on this big board and in other mock draft scenarios, number 29. But a player as an interior defensive lineman who's effective against both the run and the pass. And to be honest, he has a much more substantive resume than Mykel Williams and Shamar Stewart. That being said, he is playing on the inside and not the outside. But I will say, on top of that, the 49ers do need more defensive tackle help right now as far as pressing acute need than defensive end help. James Pierce Jr., the edge rusher out of Tennessee. There have been some questions about James Pierce Jr.'s desire to go in and play football at the highest level. Dane Brugler, who does the great draft breakdown, the beast is what they'd call it, he has talked about teams wanting James Pierce Jr., the edge rusher out of Tennessee, who's late first-round projection. Teams really talked about during the course of the interview process, they wanted to see from Pierce that he really, really loved football, that he really wanted it. And if there's any question about his desire to play, desire to win, desire to put in the thousands of hours that it's going to take, I don't think that the 49ers will pick him, because we know they're pillars of player traits that they look for. And one of them is this contagious enthusiasm for the game of football. I sat down with John Lynch a couple of years ago and we went through the 49ers vision statement, and they want contagiously competitive guys. And if somebody only cares 80 to 85%, I don't think that matches San Francisco's vision. So, maybe too, they would think about it at pick number 43 for James Pierce Jr., but I think thinking about it at number 11 is a whole different thing. And I think that the reason that the consensus big boards have him down at number 31 is because of this question. That seems to be the biggest question with James Pierce. Then there's Josh Connerly. And this is a player, even though that's a big board number 34 grade, he's an offensive tackle. That's a premium position. It would not shock me if he went significantly higher. We're talking first round. And then you talk about the 49ers. Well, would they use pick number 11 on Josh Connerly Jr.? And this is where, people get obsessed with what the big boards say, but those are analyst based. Teams often look at these players very, very differently. There's a chance that Josh Connerly Jr. is number 15 on the 49ers board. And if that's the case, then number 11 isn't that big of a reach, right? That's only 4 spots. So I think that we have to look through maybe the top 50 picks, especially in this draft, where things do fall off significantly, I think, after the first few picks. I don't think that it's a particularly top-heavy draft. But when we look at this draft being more meaty in the middle, we have to stretch this all the way out to probably around big board spot 50 and ask ourselves the question, is there a chance this guy goes in the first round? Because if it's all a mush in the middle after the first handful of selections, then it's going to turn into a wild draft. And that's all the intel that we're collecting right now. Somebody like Peter Schrager, who was talking a lot about it on Twitter, said this could be a really weird draft coming up this week. And I think it's all a product of the misbalance that we're seeing moving on from probably pick number 5 or 6 on downward. Anyway, Josh Connerly Jr., do not discount the possibility of him being a first-round pick. And he moves so well. He's a very athletic tackle. I think that's exactly what the 49ers are looking for at that particular position. So he could be in play. Now, team doesn't necessarily have to stay at number 11, right? I think that given the complexion of the draft, the 49ers would love to trade down. I just question their ability to do so. When I wrote my mock draft last week, I talked about the 1986 49ers and Bill Walsh, who traded down multiple times. They ended up making 6 trades over the course of that 86 draft. They ended up with 3 third-round picks and 3 fourth-round picks. Back then, everybody thought that Bill was crazy. I mean, you go into this article up on the San Francisco Standard, and you read this paragraph right here. In his biography on Walsh, titled The Genius, David Harris wrote that come draft day, the second floor at 49ers headquarters took on the air of a commodities market. When the wheeling and dealing was done, the 49ers no longer owned their first-round pick, but they held 13 total selections, including 3 in both the third and the fourth rounds. So everybody, even Eddie DeBartolo Jr., who had a speakerphone hookup to the 49ers draft room from Youngstown, Ohio. So he'd be listening to all this happening. Even Eddie DeBartolo Jr. thought that his own coach was a little nuts at the time. He called Bill around the second round and he asked him, are we even going to pick in this draft or are you just going to keep on trading? Like, are we going to get any new players or is this just for fun? You know, Eddie was getting a little concerned over 3 time zones away, but obviously Bill did start picking. He ended up netting Charles Haley in the 4th round. Tom Rathman was a product of that draft. John Taylor was a product of that draft. I mean, it was one of the best drafts in NFL history. And it came to be because Bill Walsh took advantage of the fact that other teams seemed to be probably a little too biased with their own evaluation process, a little too confident in their own evaluation process. And they were more than willing to trade up to get certain guys they really liked. Those obviously were relative overpays, whereas the 49ers were able to trade down with those willing partners. And there were a lot of underpays on the 49ers end that ended up blossoming into fantastic players. I would say that Charles Haley, a Hall of Famer picked in the 4th round, was an underpay for the 49ers. And that's exactly what you want. You want to find that kind of value in the NFL draft. Unfortunately for the 49ers, even though I've used this 1986 draft as something to consider, a little bit of a guidepost here entering 2025, unfortunately, the rest of the league has adopted Bill Walsh's strategies since then, right? I mean, Bill Walsh, even in this book, this is the next book I'm going to read from Bill Walsh, The Score Takes Care of Itself. This is written by Bill himself. He was not shy about sharing his information. It was the spirit of abundance. He wanted other young coaches, executives to know what he did. So that has worked maybe toward the 49ers' detriment over the decades since Bill Walsh implemented all these revolutionary ideas. But a lot of teams like to trade down now. And if more teams want to trade down than trade up in this 2025 draft, well, it's going to be really, really hard to trade down since it does take 2 to tango. A lot of people act like they're playing Madden and they just can click a button and a trade is going to happen. And unfortunately, that's not how things work. So it's not set in stone that the 49ers are going to be picking at number 11, but I think it's more likely than not that they're going to have to stay at that number 11 pick, just given how the trade market is working. That being said, my original point still stands. You probably have to look through the top 50 of this draft and consider, can that guy go in the first round? Because mock drafts are famously inaccurate. Team evaluations are different than the public's evaluation, and this draft is particularly middle heavy instead of top heavy. So, now we're down to number 48, Arante Ursary. This is an offensive tackle out of Minnesota. I actually picked him to be the 49ers. I had him as a 2nd round selection, but let's just say their 2nd pick, because I think they might have to trade up from number 43 to get him, even though on the big board, he is number 48. So, I mean, you see him at 48 on the big board and you say, okay, well, maybe they can get Arante Ursary, big tackle out of Minnesota in the 2nd round. And again, once the draft gets rolling and offensive tackles come flying off the board, with offensive line being as delicate of a position as it is, right? I mean, this is quality tackles are in such short supply in this league. I can't see Arante Ursary lasting until number 48. I think if the 49ers were to get him with their second pick, as I projected in my mock draft, I think they would have to trade up. Then there's Darius Alexander, defensive tackle out of Toledo. Really, really good-looking player against the run, really rangy against the run. I actually mocked him to the 49ers with one of their third-round picks. He's number 52, though, on the big board, so even that might not be possible. It's all a guessing game, right, at this point. Harold Fannin Jr., the tight end, that was the first known top 30 visit for the 49ers out of Bowling Green. Now, this would be a hell of a Deebo Samuel replacement. He's a player who handles the football frequently. 49% of Bowling Green's offense went through Harold Fannin Jr. last year. And all I know is the 49ers are looking for adaptability out of their offensive weapons. And I would say that Harold Fannin Jr. would definitely be able to bring that. This is yards after the catch adaptability and enough size to develop him into a blocker. But I don't think that he'd be your standard inline blocking tight end. I think that he'd be more of a glorified tight end as far as his ability to line up in the slot, maybe even line up out wide. Kyle Shanahan would certainly like that pick. That would be another weapon for Brock Purdy and his offense. Marcus Bowe out of Purdue. This is a developmental guard. Basketball player turned into an offensive lineman. I don't think that he looked great at the Senior Bowl, but I think there's still a lot of meat left on the bone. I think the 49ers love the movement ability there. They brought him in on a 30 visit as well. Omar Norman Law. This is an intriguing defensive lineman, edge rusher, but that can also play on the inside. I think he played at 9 different positions last year for Tennessee. So playing basically all the techniques across the front. And you could probably get him at an affordable rate. You're not going to have to use a first or second round pick on Omar Norman Law. Then there's Kyle Williams, the wide receiver. And it's probably time for people to get over the name PTSD on Kyle Williams. I personally mocked Alec Iomanner, the Stanford receiver, to the 49ers in the third round, but Kyle Williams could very easily go to the third round as well. I even joked that it might be a Kyle Shanahan versus John Lynch debate between Kyle Williams, who separates really well, put up big numbers, 70-plus catches at Washington State, versus John Lynch's guy, Alec Iomanner, the Stanford guy, right? There's the obvious connection there. Anthony Belton, tackle out of North Carolina State. This would be a more developmental tackle prospect. You could probably get him in the third round if you're the 49ers. We know that they have extremely high standards for their offensive tackles, but maybe Anthony Belton would be able to fit some of those standards if the 49ers think they can develop him. Chris Paul Jr., Pooh Paul, the linebacker out of Ole Miss, previously Arkansas. Yes, I get it. Dre Greenlaw comparisons. There should also be Dre Greenlaw comparisons to Kane Medrano, who is the linebacker out of UCLA. 49ers might be able to get him. He's way down here. Might be able to get him much later in the draft. Kane is actually faster than Chris Paul. I think both Paul and Kane Medrano have some tackling issues that they need to shore up, but the 49ers have developed linebackers better than anybody, and middle round to late round at that position could end up being a good value for San Francisco. Couple cornerbacks in this draft who are just dogs, who the 49ers hosted. Quincy Riley out of Louisville and Kobe Bryant out of Kansas. Then there's also Bilal Cohn out of Western Michigan. Those are all the 3 cornerback visits. You know, there's so much talk in some of these national mock drafts about the 49ers going first round pick for cornerback, but they've never done that before. Instead, their view of the cornerback position has been, okay, we'll sacrifice a little bit on the athleticism scores, but if the guy is wired aggressively, if he's wired like a dog, we're going to like him. Diamante Lenore being a great example. And the visit list seems to suggest that that's their strategy to this day. And the strategy's worked with Renardo Green. It's the highest ever pick, by the way, at the cornerback position, number 61 for the 49ers. But Green, Diamante Lenore, they signed Trey Brown. I think he's cut from the same cloth. You look at Quincy Riley, you look at Bilal Cohn, and you look at Kobe Bryant, all guys that might fit that mold for the 49ers. Then there's Aeneas Peebles, defensive tackle out of Virginia Tech. David Walker, the edge rusher out of Central Arkansas, is one of the more intriguing players in the whole draft because he might be a 5th-round pick. He is not your usual edge rusher body, not in the modern game. He's like 285 pounds. So if the 49ers are serious about stopping the run and loading up on personnel, it's going to be good setting the edge against the run, that edge rusher position. David Walker might actually be really good value for the 49ers, and they did host him. So that one is worth keeping an eye out for. I actually picked Caleb Rogers, the interior lineman out of Texas Tech. He's a tackle in college, but I think he's going to be a guard at the next level. I projected him to the 49ers. Because I think that they need to load up on interior linemen as well. I think that with Aaron Banks gone, with the success that you saw last year from Dominic Pooney as a third-round pick, guard is just as important as tackle these days. I mean, you've got so many of these athletic defensive tackles getting after it. It all started when Aaron Donald would move inside, outside. But then, I mean, toward the end, Aaron Donald was like 265 pounds. And he's just beating these interior linemen like a drum with athleticism. So if you don't focus on the interior line, you're probably going to be in even more trouble than if you don't focus on tackle, because that pressure is going to get to the quarterback that much quicker since it's off the inside. It's coming from closer than from the outside. So I think it'd be smart for the 49ers to draft a guard again, and the one that they hosted was Caleb Rogers. Then there's Elijah Roberts, another defensive lineman, another edge prospect out of SMU. So keep an eye on Elijah Roberts and David Walker, a couple defensive linemen for the 49ers. Smaller schools, Central Arkansas and SMU. Jackson Hawes, blocking tight end, Georgia Tech by way of Yale. Jalen Conyers, also one of my mock draftees coming out of Texas Tech, by way of ASU, where Herm Edwards worked with him. Bilal Cohn, we talked about him at the corner. Kane Madrano, the linebacker, we talked about him. Then if you're not going to go third round like Elikai Manor or Kyle Williams at wide receiver, maybe you go somewhere lower with Jordan Watkins, the receiver out of Ole Miss, speedster, 4-3 kind of guy. And then Jonah Monheim as a bonus at the end, and this guy might be an undrafted free agent. Jonah Monheim played some center and projects as a center at the next level out of USC. Remember the 49ers signed Drake Nugent out of Michigan. He's still developing with them after the draft last year. Maybe they bring in another lower round or undrafted free agent developmental center. So that is the 30 visit list. I think that should get you ready for this draft week. And then the one guy that I really featured today was Mykel Williams. Would you be mad if the 49ers drafted Mykel Williams at number 11? The odds for him going ahead of pick number 16 are very, very good. And guess who has a pick ahead of number 16? Yes, the 49ers have a pick ahead of 16. Anyway, that's the primer on 49ers draft week. You know what else you should check out right now? It's up on the San Francisco Standard. Our SF 100 list is up. The San Francisco Standard's highly subjective, surely divisive list of who holds power, influence, and attention in San Francisco in 2025. Really cool concept. Of course, Steph Curry's on there. Warriors, what a big win last night. I mean, they just ground that out. Now, they almost blew it. That second half wasn't pretty, but remember, they weren't favored to win that game. But remember that we said, hey, they've got experience. The Rockets don't. They have star power. The Rockets don't have as much of it. And that typically wins out in the playoffs, and that won out last night. But Steph Curry, because he changed the Warriors, the NBA, and the world, is one of our 100 most influential people in San Francisco. We have a 49ers tilt to this. George Kittle is one of the 100 most influential people in San Francisco. And so is, I'm going to find her. It's 100 of these names, so it's not that easy to find. So is Kristen Juszczyk. Congratulations to Kristen on this list. I believe those are the two 49ers ties on this list. So you can go check this out, sfstandard.com/SF100 or SF-100. That is, I'll tweet this in a little bit, but I wrote up the part on George Kittle, and I think it's definitely worth your time. All right, draft week is here. It's going to be really busy. We're going to keep our eyes on who reports, who doesn't. We know Nick Bosa is already in the Bay Area. Will Brock Purdy report to the start of the 49ers offseason program tomorrow? That question is on our minds, and and we could talk about Mykel Williams and who the 49ers will select at number 11. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. This is a huge week. We're going to have a lot of big shows. I've got to head to the airport in a little bit. Time to make it back to the West Coast. Talk to you guys soon.